The guard at the gate stands perfectly still. Rain drips from the brim of his bearskin cap, running down the red wool of his tunic in thin, dark lines. Behind him, through iron railings and across a wide courtyard, Buckingham Palace rises like a pale cliff face. 775 rooms hidden behind Portland stone that has absorbed 2 centuries of London's smoke and rain. The building is famous, photographed millions of times every year. But most people never ask the question that matters most. Who paid the real price for this? January 1703. The land where the palace now stands is still a swamp. Marshland owned by the crown since the Norman conquest, too wet for building, good only for grazing cattle and collecting reeds. A man named John Sheffield, Duke of Buckingham, stands in the mud and sees something no one else does. He sees a house. Not just any house. The finest private residence in London. Sheffield is 56 years old. He has survived courts, conspiracies, and the dangerous game of royal favour through 4 different monarchs. He knows how power works in England. It flows toward those who display it most convincingly. And nothing displays power like architecture. The land he is standing on costs him nothing. The king grants it to him as a reward for political loyalty. Sheffield understands the gift for what it truly is, a test. Build something worthy, and the favour continues. Build something mediocre, and watch the invitations stop arriving. He hires William Wynd, an experienced architect who understands both classical proportions and the practical problems of London geology. Together they design Buckingham House. 3 stories, red brick, white stone dressings, a mansion built to impress but not intimidate. Sheffield wants elegance, not fortress walls. He wants ambassadors to visit and leave thinking that the Duke of Buckingham possesses refined taste and considerable wealth without appearing threatening to the crown. But the swamp fights back. Workers arrive in spring of 1703. They come from villages along the Thames, from the slums of Southwark and Whitechapel, from anywhere poverty makes men desperate enough to accept dangerous work. The foreman, a man named Richard Blackwell, experienced in London construction, takes one look at the waterlogged ground and knows immediately this will not be simple. They dig foundation trenches and find them filled with water by morning. The soil is soft, unstable, layered with centuries of decomposed vegetation and river silt. Every shovel of earth removed is replaced by seeping groundwater. The men work in mud up to their knees. Their boots sink. Their tools slip. Progress is measured in inches. Blackwell proposes a solution. Drive wooden piles deep into the soft ground until they reach firmer earth below. Create a forest of timber beneath the foundation. Build the house on top of this hidden structure. Among the workers hired to drive these piles is Thomas Archer, a carpenter from Southwark. He is 28 years old, married to a woman named Catherine. They have 2 young children, a boy named William and a girl named Elizabeth. Thomas is skilled with his hands, capable of precise work, but pile driving is not precise. It is brutal, repetitive labor that destroys men's bodies. The work begins before dawn. Teams of 4 men lift massive wooden hammers called pile drivers, essentially enormous weights attached to ropes and pulleys. They haul the weight up, then release it. The hammer falls. The pile drives a few inches deeper into the mud. They repeat this action hundreds of times per day. Thomas's hands blister within hours on his first day. By the end of the first week, the blisters have hardened into calluses. By the end of the first month, his shoulders burn with constant pain. The motion of lifting, releasing, creates injuries that never fully heal. Men develop chronic pain in their backs, their knees, their wrists. The pay is 6 shillings per week. slightly better than what Thomas could earn in smaller construction jobs scattered across London. It is enough to keep his family fed, to pay rent on their small room in a boarding house, to save a few pennies towards some vague future where he might afford better. Catherine visits the construction site once, bringing Thomas his midday meal. She walks through mud, past piles of timber and stone, past men who barely glance at her. She finds Thomas stripped to his shirt despite the cold, sweat running down his face, his hands wrapped in cloth to protect the worst of his blisters. She does not say what she is thinking. She hands him the bread and cheese, waits while he eats, then walks home in silence. That night, lying next to him in their narrow bed, she listens to him breathe, each inhalation rough and labored, and she wonders how long his body can sustain this. The pile driving takes 6 months. Hundreds of timber piles are driven deep into the marshy ground, creating a stable foundation beneath what will become Buckingham House. The workers then lay massive stone blocks on top of the piles, building up the foundation until it rises above the waterline. In August of 1703, disaster strikes. A pile driver collapses. The ropes holding the massive weight snap without warning. The hammer falls incorrectly, smashing sideways into the wooden frame holding it upright. The entire structure, 20 feet tall and weighing hundreds of pounds, topples over. 2 men are directly underneath. One, a laborer named Stephen Price, dies instantly. The falling timber crushes his skull. The other, a young man named Jack Moore, barely 20 years old, is trapped beneath the wreckage. His leg is shattered. Men rush to lift the timber off him. They pull him free, screaming, bone visible through torn flesh. Jack Moore survives the initial injury, but dies 6 days later from infection. There is no hospital, care for men like him. A local barber tries to set the bone. The wound festers. Gangrene spreads up his leg. He dies in agony in a rented room, surrounded by men who worked beside him but barely knew his name. Thomas Archer is fetching tools from the other side of the site when the pile driver collapses. He hears the crash, the screams. He runs back and sees the chaos. He sees Stephen Price's body, unmoving, blood pooling in the mud. He sees Jack Moore being pulled from the wreckage, his face white with shock. Thomas returns to work the next morning. What else can he do? Catherine needs the wages. The children need food. Stopping work means returning to uncertainty, to scrambling for day labor that may or may not appear, to the constant fear of destitution. No one from the Duke's household attends Stephen Price's burial. No compensation is offered to his widow. She is left with 3 children and no income. Within months, she disappears into the anonymous poverty of East London. History does not record what happens to her. Jack Moore's family receives nothing either. His mother, a washerwoman, buries her son and goes back to scrubbing other people's laundry in cold water until her own hands are destroyed. The pile driving continues. The foundation rises. By 1704, the walls begin to take shape. Bricklayers arrive, skilled craftsmen who command higher wages than the labourers. They build the exterior walls, carefully placing each brick, ensuring the mortar sets properly, creating the structure that will define Buckingham House for generations. Thomas transitions from pile driving to carpentry work inside the rising structure. He builds interior frames, constructs staircases, fits window casements. The work is still hard but less immediately brutal than the pile driving. His body begins to recover slightly, though the damage to his shoulders and back never fully heals. By 1705, Buckingham House is complete. It rises from what was swampland, 3 stories of red brick and white stone, elegant proportions, large windows admitting light into spacious rooms. The Duke moves in with his family. The furnishings are expensive, imported from France and Italy. The artwork is carefully chosen. The gardens are laid out with geometric precision. Foreign ambassadors visit and compliment the proportions. The Duke's gamble has paid off. He has created exactly what he intended, a visible symbol of wealth, taste, and power that reinforces his position in the complex social machinery of early 18th century England. Thomas Archer never sees the finished interior. Workers like him do not receive invitations. He is paid his final wages, a total of just over £15 for nearly 2 years of labour, and dismissed. He finds other construction work across London, a church in the city, a merchant's house near the river, a warehouse in Deptford. The years pass. Thomas's body continues to deteriorate. The chronic pain in his shoulders worsens. He develops a persistent cough, likely from years of breathing dust and working in damp conditions. In 1719, during a particularly harsh winter, the cough turns into pneumonia. Catherine nurses him as best she can. She boils water for steam. She makes thin broth. She sits beside him in their cold room and watches him struggle to breathe. Thomas dies in February of 1719, 44 years old, his lungs destroyed by 16 years of construction work in London's worst conditions. His burial is simple: a wooden coffin, a grave in a common burial ground, no headstone. Catherine and the children attend, a few neighbours. The grave marker is a wooden cross that will rot and disappear within a decade. No record connects Thomas Archer to Buckingham House. No plaque bears his name. No official history acknowledges his contribution. Yet without him and hundreds like him, the house would not exist. The elegant rooms, the impressive facade, the symbol of ducal power, all of it rests on a foundation built by men whose names were never meant to be remembered. Catherine survives her husband by 31 years. She works as a laundress, taking in washing from wealthier households, scrubbing clothes until her hands are permanently reddened and swollen. She dies in 1750, 68 years old, and is buried in the same common ground as Thomas, though not beside him. There is no system for keeping families together in death when they cannot afford private plots. Their children, William and Elizabeth, survive into adulthood. William becomes a labourer like his father. Elizabeth marries a shopkeeper and disappears into the anonymous flow of working-class London life. Neither of them ever learns that their father helped build what will eventually become Buckingham Palace, the most famous royal residence in the world. The house stands. The swamp beneath it is forgotten. The workers who forced the ground into submission are forgotten. Only the stone remains, indifferent and permanent. Chapter 1. When a king buys someone else's dream. Only the stone remains, but kings inherit stone along with everything else, and one young king will transform a house into the seed of empire. 1761. King George III is 23 years old. He has been on the throne for 1 year, crowned after his grandfather George II died suddenly. The young king is earnest, deeply interested in agriculture and science, determined to be a moral example to his people. He reads voraciously, studies astronomy, maintains detailed journals. In September of 1761, he marries Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a minor German princess. They meet for the first time on their wedding day. The marriage is entirely political, arranged to strengthen British ties with German states and to produce heirs. Neither George nor Charlotte has any illusions about romance. But something unexpected happens. They develop genuine affection for each other. Charlotte is intelligent, musical, interested in botany. George appreciates her mind as well as her willingness to fulfill her royal duties. Within months, Charlotte is pregnant with their first child. They need a residence in London. St. James's Palace, the official royal residence, is ancient, uncomfortable, and oppressively formal. Every movement is watched. Every conversation is scrutinized. George wants privacy, a place where he and Charlotte can live something resembling a normal family life. He hears that Buckingham House is available for purchase. The Duke of Buckingham's heirs, lacking their father's ambition and political acumen, see the house as an expensive burden. They want to sell. George visits the property in May of 1761. He walks through the rooms, admires the proportions, examines the gardens. The house is exactly what he wants. Grand enough to be respectable, but not so enormous that it feels like living in a public monument. Large windows, spacious rooms, extensive gardens where he can conduct agricultural experiments, and Charlotte can develop her botanical collections. The asking price is £28,000, an enormous sum. George does not hesitate. Parliament approves the purchase. By June, the transaction is complete. Buckingham House becomes the Queen's House, a private royal residence technically belonging to Charlotte rather than the crown itself. Charlotte is delighted. She immediately begins planning changes. She wants a library, a proper music room, better facilities for scientific equipment. George indulges her. He wants her happy. More than that, he wants to create a home that reflects his own values: rationality, learning, domestic virtue. But George cannot leave anything alone. Within months of purchasing the house, he begins to obsess over improvements. The rooms are good, but could be better. The library is adequate, but should be expanded. The gardens need restructuring according to the latest theories of landscape design. He hires Sir William Chambers, the most fashionable architect in London, to oversee renovations. Chambers is experienced, expensive, and extremely competent. He understands what George wants even when George himself cannot fully articulate it. The work begins in 1762. Walls are moved, rooms are reconfigured, new wings are planned to accommodate the expanding royal household. The quiet elegance John Sheffield created begins to disappear, replaced with something more elaborate, more expensive, more reflective of royal ambition. The bills accumulate quickly. Chambers submits invoices. Craftsmen demand payment. Materials arrive from across England and Europe. Fine woods from the Baltic, marble from Italy, decorative plasterwork commissioned from the best workshops in London. George's treasury officials grow nervous. The king is spending heavily. On his private residence, while Britain is still recovering financially from the 7 Years' War, a global conflict that ended just a few years earlier in 1763. Taxes remain high. The national debt is staggering. Public resentment toward royal spending is building. George ignores the warnings. He wants his house perfected. He believes that a virtuous, educated king deserves a residence that reflects those qualities. He does not see the contradiction between his professed concern for economy and his escalating expenditure on Buckingham House. Among the workers hired for the renovations is William Harper, a plasterer from Clerkenwell. He is 32 years old, trained since childhood in the craft of ornamental plasterwork. His father was a plasterer. His grandfather was a plasterer. The skill has been passed down through 3 generations, each one refining techniques, learning which mixtures of lime and sand create the most durable surfaces, which tools produce the finest details. William is hired specifically to work on the ceilings in what will become the Queen's private apartments. The designs are elaborate: geometric patterns, floral motifs, classical figures rendered in high relief. Each ceiling will take weeks to complete, requiring careful planning, precise execution, and physical endurance. The work begins with measurements and sketches. William studies the architect's drawings, calculates proportions, orders materials. Then comes the physical labor: mixing plaster in large wooden troughs, carrying heavy buckets up scaffolding, applying wet plaster to ceilings while working above his head for hours at a time. The work destroys the body slowly. Arms ache from constant lifting. Necks stiffen from looking upward. Hands crack and bleed from constant immersion in lime-heavy plaster. The lime burns skin, creating permanent damage that worsens with each year of exposure. William works on the Queen's house for 3 years, 1762 to 1765. He creates ceilings of extraordinary beauty, intricate decorations that will survive for centuries. But the cost to his body is severe. His hands, once nimble and precise, become stiff and swollen. The joints thicken. The skin hardens into permanent calluses that crack open and bleed. In winter, the cracks deepen, sometimes becoming infected. William wraps his hands in cloth soaked in tallow, trying to keep the skin from splitting further, but the work continues regardless. At home in Clerkenwell, his wife Mary manages the household finances. William's wages are decent when they arrive, but payments from the royal household are notoriously irregular. Work is completed in June. Payment might arrive in August, or October, or not at all until Mary visits the pay office in person and demands what is owed. This creates constant stress. Bills must be paid regardless of whether the royal household has settled its accounts. The baker wants his money. The landlord wants rent. The coal merchant will not extend credit indefinitely. Mary learns to budget with ruthless efficiency. She buys the cheapest cuts of meat. She waters down the milk. She mends clothes until they are more patch than original fabric. She tells their 2 children, both daughters, that they are saving for new shoes, but the savings never materialize because every penny goes toward immediate survival. William sees this. He knows his labor enriches the king while his own family struggles. But what can he do? Plastering work in London is competitive. Hundreds of craftsmen chase the same jobs. Complaining means losing your position and watching someone else take it gratefully. So he works. He climbs scaffolding every morning. He mixes plaster until his arms shake. He presses decorative molds into wet ceilings until the details are perfect, and slowly his lungs begin to fail. Plaster dust is inescapable. It fills the air whenever dry plaster is sanded or old plaster is chipped away. It coats everything, clothes, hair, skin, and it is breathed in, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. The fine particles settle in the lungs, causing chronic inflammation that gradually destroys the ability to breathe. By 1765, William has developed a persistent cough. It is worse in the mornings, easing slightly as the day progresses. He coughs up thick phlegm, sometimes streaked with blood. He dismisses it as a temporary ailment, something that will pass once the current job is finished. It does not pass. William completes his work on the Queen's house in late 1765. The ceilings are magnificent. Charlotte herself walks through the completed rooms, accompanied by chambers, and expresses satisfaction with the quality. She does not meet William. She does not know his name. She sees only the finished work, perfect and permanent. William collects his final payment and moves to another job, a merchant's house in the city of London. The cough worsens. By 1770, he can work only half days, his breathing too labored for sustained effort. By 1775, he cannot work at all. Mary takes in sewing work, stitching shirts for a tailor at a rate of 3 pence per shirt. She works from dawn until her eyes can no longer focus in the candlelight. Their daughters, now teenagers, find work as domestic servants in wealthy households. The family survives on combined earnings that total less than William once made alone. William dies in 1778, 48 years old. The cause of death is recorded as consumption, a catch-all term for any wasting disease of the lungs. Modern medicine would recognize it as silicosis, an incurable condition caused by inhaling fine mineral dust over many years. His widow receives no pension from the royal household. There is no compensation for workers injured or killed in the course of their employment. Mary survives by continuing to take in sewing work. She dies in 1792, her eyesight ruined, her hands crippled by arthritis from decades of needlework. Their daughters marry working men and disappear into the anonymous masses of labouring London. Neither of them ever learns that their father created some of the most beautiful plasterwork in what will become Buckingham Palace. The ceilings William Harper created still exist. Tourists walk beneath them today, admiring the craftsmanship, the elegance, the refined taste of the Georgian era. They do not think about the man who mixed the plaster, climbed the scaffolding, worked above his head until his arms trembled, breathed the dust that killed him. The palace shows only the result. The cost remains hidden. Chapter 2. The Mad King's Prisoner. The cost remains hidden, but madness has a way of revealing what propriety tries to conceal, especially when it descends upon a king. 1788. King George III is 50 years old. He has reigned for 28 years. His marriage to Charlotte has produced 15 children, 13 of whom survive. He has transformed Buckingham House into a comfortable family residence, expanded it multiple times, filled it with books and scientific instruments and the tangible evidence of an inquiring mind. But in October of 1788, something goes terribly wrong. George begins experiencing severe abdominal pain. He develops a fever. His speech becomes rapid, erratic, difficult to follow. He talks incessantly, jumping from subject to subject with no logical connection. His writing becomes illegible, sentences trailing off into meaningless scrawls. The court physicians are summoned. They examine the king and find themselves baffled. His symptoms do not match any familiar disease. The physical pain suggests gout or kidney stones. The mental symptoms suggest something far more serious. Within days, George's condition deteriorates dramatically. He becomes violent, physically aggressive toward his attendants. He grabs servants, shakes them, shouts incoherently. He attempts to attack the Prince of Wales during a formal dinner. He claims to be in love with Lady Pembroke, one of Charlotte's ladies-in-waiting, announcing his intention to divorce Charlotte and marry Lady Pembroke instead. Charlotte is terrified. The man she has lived with for 27 years, the father of her children, has become unrecognizable. She moves out of their shared apartments in Buckingham House, retreating to separate rooms at the opposite end of the building. She refuses to be alone with him. The physicians take control. They confine George to a suite of rooms in the Queen's house. They restrain him using a straitjacket when he becomes too violent to manage. They apply treatments that amount to torture, forced vomiting, purging, blistering his skin with hot poultices, bloodletting to drain, to away the supposed bad humours causing his illness. None of it helps. George's condition worsens. He screams at night, long, incoherent streams of words that echo through the corridors. He weeps uncontrollably. He experiences hallucinations, seeing people who are not there, conversing with dead relatives, insisting that London is flooded or that he can see Hanover from his window. The household staff witness all of this. Servants cannot avoid seeing and hearing what happens in the king's apartments. The walls are not soundproof. The doors do not seal completely. The screams penetrate everywhere. Among the servants working in Buckingham House is Elizabeth Cole, a housemaid 19 years old. She was hired 6 months earlier, in April of 1788, recruited from a village in Hampshire where her family has worked as agricultural labourers for generations. The position at the Queen's house seemed like an extraordinary opportunity. Steady wages, room and board, a chance to escape the grinding poverty of rural life. Elizabeth works in the upper floors of the house, cleaning apartments, changing linens, maintaining fires. Her duties bring her near the king's confined quarters. She hears things she wishes she could unhear. Late one night in November of 1788, Elizabeth is carrying fresh linens through a corridor near the king's apartments. She hears screaming. Not shouting, not anger, but screaming, the sound of someone in genuine terror or agony. She freezes, unsure whether to continue or retreat. The screaming stops, then she hears furniture breaking. Something heavy crashes against a wall. Men's voices, shouting commands, more crashing. Elizabeth hurries past the door, her heart pounding. She deposits the linens in the appropriate room and returns to the servants' quarters as quickly as possible without actually running. In the cramped room she shares with 3 other housemaids, Elizabeth whispers what she heard. The other maids are unsurprised. They have heard similar things. Everyone in the household knows the king is mad. The question is whether saying it aloud constitutes treason. An older maid, a woman named Margaret, who has worked in royal households for 12 years, warns Elizabeth to stay silent. Servants who gossip about the royal family lose their positions. Worse, they can be prosecuted for sedition, spreading false information that damages the crown's reputation. Elizabeth promises to be careful, but she cannot stop hearing the screams. The king's madness becomes the worst-kept secret in London. Newspapers cannot publish direct reports. Censorship laws prevent that. But rumours spread through coffee houses and taverns. The king is mad. The king is dying. The king has been locked away. The Prince of Wales will become regent. The political implications are enormous. If George is truly incapable of ruling, someone else must govern in his name. The Prince of Wales, George's eldest son, wants the regency. Parliament debates the constitutional questions. Can a mad king be removed? What legal mechanisms exist for transferring power? The entire structure of British constitutional monarchy faces a crisis it was never designed to handle. But in February of 1789, George recovers. The madness recedes as mysteriously as it appeared. His speech returns to normal. His behavior stabilizes. The violent episodes stop. He resumes his duties, though he is changed. He becomes more anxious, more religious, more obsessed with maintaining control over himself and his household. Charlotte returns to sharing apartments with him, though the trust is damaged. She has seen what he can become. She knows it could happen again. It does. 1795. George suffers a second major episode. 1798 another. 1801 another. Each time the pattern repeats. Physical pain, mental disintegration, violent behavior, confinement, experimental treatments, eventual recovery. Modern historians believe George suffered from porphyria, a genetic metabolic disorder that causes severe symptoms including abdominal pain, neurological damage, and psychiatric disturbances. It is hereditary, passing through his family line from Mary, Queen of Scots. Contemporary physicians have no understanding of the condition. They treat it as madness, moral weakness, or divine punishment. The Queen's house becomes a place of shadows. The family continues to live there. Children grow up within its walls, but everyone knows that the king's madness can return at any moment. The uncertainty creates a permanent atmosphere of tension. Servants whisper about ghosts. Some claim to hear footsteps in empty corridors late at night, the sound of furniture being moved in rooms no one occupies. A few report seeing shadows that do not correspond to any visible source, or feeling sudden drops in temperature in specific locations. One servant, a footman named Thomas Gray, swears he saw a figure standing in a corridor near the king's old apartments at 3 a.m. He describes a man in old-fashioned clothing, standing motionless, staring at a wall. Thomas approached, intending to ask what the person was doing out of bed. As he got closer, the figure vanished. Thomas reports this to the housekeeper, who dismisses it as exhaustion or too much wine. but Thomas insists he was sober, alert, and certain of what he saw. Other servants begin sharing similar experiences. A housemaid reports hearing a man's voice crying out in pain in a room she knows is empty. A cook describes seeing a shadow pass across a doorway when no one is there to cast it. A groom claims his candle was extinguished by an unseen force while walking through a servant's corridor. The stories spread. Some servants refuse to work alone in certain parts of the house after dark. Others carry religious medallions or small tokens for protection against whatever might linger in the walls. The rational explanations are obvious. Old houses settle, creating sounds that seem like footsteps. Wind moves through gaps in walls and windows, extinguishing candles and creating drafts that feel like cold spots. Tired minds working long hours in dim light see what they expect to see, especially when primed by ghost stories shared in servants' quarters. But there is another explanation, less tangible but perhaps more true. The house holds suffering. George's madness was not quiet or dignified. It was violent, terrifying, accompanied by screaming and physical restraint and treatments that amounted to torture. That pain soaked into the walls, into the memory of the place. Servants who know this history, who have heard the king's screams or seen him restrained, who understand that this elegant house was also a prison, cannot help but feel that presence. Whether it manifests as actual ghosts or as psychological projections of their own knowledge and fear is almost beside the point. The house is haunted by history, if nothing else. The verdict remains open. Some people believe in ghosts, others do not. But everyone agrees that Buckingham House holds something darker than its facade suggests. George's final episode begins in 1810 and never ends. His mind collapses completely. He becomes blind, deaf, unable to recognize anyone. For the last 10 years of his life, he exists in a world entirely disconnected from reality, kept alive by attendants, but absent from everything that made him human. He dies in January of 1820, 81 years old, having spent the last decade in darkness and madness. Charlotte has already died, in November of 1817, 74 years old. Her last years were spent largely alone in Buckingham House, surrounded by servants and physicians, but isolated from genuine companionship. Her children visited rarely, busy with their own lives and embarrassed by their parents' decline. When Charlotte dies, the house she spent 56 years living in falls silent. The libraries she assembled, the botanical collections she maintained, the music rooms where she played piano and sang, all of it remains, but the life drains out of them. The house becomes a tomb before it becomes a palace. Chapter 3. The Uncle Who Wanted to Outdo France. The house becomes a tomb, but tombs can be demolished or transformed, and one extravagant uncle will choose transformation at any cost. 1820. King George IV ascends the throne in January. He has been Prince of Wales for 58 years, longer than most people live. He has spent those decades waiting, watching his father descend into madness, serving as Prince Regent since 1811, when Parliament finally acknowledged George III could no longer rule. Now, at 58 years old, George IV is finally king. He is vastly overweight, addicted to laudanum and alcohol, drowning in debts from decades of extravagant spending. His marriage to Caroline of Brunswick was a disaster from the beginning, a political arrangement both parties despised. They separated years ago. Caroline lives in exile on the continent, an embarrassment George wishes would simply disappear. But George IV has one undeniable passion: architecture. He has spent decades transforming the Royal Pavilion in Brighton into a fantastical palace of domes and minarets, a building that horrifies architectural conservatives and delights him. He understands that monarchs are judged not only by military victories or political achievements, but by what they leave behind in stone. Now he turns his attention to Buckingham House. He looks at the building his father lived in and sees mediocrity. Yes, it is comfortable. Yes, it has been expanded and improved. But it is still fundamentally a private residence, not a palace. It cannot compete with Versailles, with Schönbrunn, with the great royal palaces of Europe that proclaim their occupants' power through sheer architectural grandeur. George wants a palace that makes a statement. He wants something that rivals Versailles, something that proves Britain is not merely a commercial and naval power, but a cultural force equal to France. He wants foreign ambassadors to arrive, see Buckingham Palace, and understand immediately that Britain's king lives in splendour worthy of empire. He summons John Nash, his favourite architect, the man who transformed Brighton Pavilion. Nash is 68 years old, known for grand visions, theatrical designs, and a complete inability to stay within budget. He has declared bankruptcy multiple times, but remains employed because he possesses the one quality George values above all others. He never says no. George explains his vision. Transform Buckingham House into Buckingham Palace. New wings, a grand entrance, state rooms designed to overwhelm visitors with magnificence. Marble, gold leaf, the finest materials from across Europe. Spare no expense. Nash understands perfectly. Both men love spectacle. Both believe that money spent on beauty is never wasted. Both ignore practical considerations like whether the nation can actually afford what they are planning. Nash begins designing. The plans are breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. He proposes completely remodeling the existing house, adding massive new wings to create a U-shaped structure around a central courtyard. The main entrance will be a triumphal arch modelled on the Arch of Constantine in Rome, covered in marble and topped with a massive bronze sculpture. The interior will feature a grand staircase, a throne room, a ballroom, picture galleries, all decorated with the most expensive materials available. When Nash presents preliminary cost estimates to Parliament, he claims the project will cost £250,000. This is a staggering sum, but Nash assures everyone it will not increase. He is confident, persuasive, utterly believable. He is also completely wrong. The project will eventually cost more than £1 million, over 4 times the original estimate. But that reality is still years away. In 1825, Parliament approves the initial budget and work begins. Hundreds of labourers descend on Buckingham House. The transformation begins immediately. Entire sections of the existing building are demolished. New foundations are dug. Stone arrives from quarries across England. Marble is shipped from Italy. Timber comes from the Baltic. Iron and bronze from foundries in Birmingham and Sheffield. The scale of the project attracts workers from across Britain. Among them is James Dalton, a stonemason from Kent. He is 41 years old, experienced, with a reputation for precise work and reliability. He has worked on churches, country houses, commercial buildings, but nothing approaching the scale of what Nash is attempting. James is hired to work on the exterior stonework, specifically the Portland stone that will form the palace's facade. Portland stone is quarried on the Isle of Portland in Dorset, a hard white limestone that weathers beautifully, becoming slightly darker over time but retaining its elegant appearance for centuries. It is the stone of choice for important buildings in London, used for St. Paul's Cathedral, the British Museum, and now Buckingham Palace. The work is punishing. Each block of stone must be carefully shaped to fit precisely into its designated position. Masons work with hammers and chisels, trimming edges, smoothing surfaces, creating perfectly level beds where mortar will bind stone to stone. The work is done by hand. Every stroke of the hammer sends vibrations up the mason's arms. Every day of chiseling releases clouds of stone dust that hang in the air and settle on everything. James breathes this dust. All the stonemasons do. It is inescapable. Within hours of starting work each morning, his clothes are white with it. His hair is coated, his skin is gritty with it, and his lungs, though he does not realize it yet, are being slowly destroyed by it. The dust particles are tiny, fine enough to penetrate deep into the lungs where they lodge in tissue and cause permanent damage. The body cannot expel them. They accumulate, causing chronic inflammation and scarring that gradually reduces the lungs' ability to absorb oxygen. But in 1825, this process is not understood. Stonemasons know they develop breathing problems after years of work, but they attribute it to the general hardships of the trade, not to the specific mechanism of stone dust inhalation. James works 6 days a week, dawn to dusk in summer, shorter hours in winter when daylight is limited. The pay is good, 2 shillings per day, double what a common labourer earns. It is enough to support his wife and 4 children comfortably by working-class standards. They rent a house in Southwark, 2 rooms, which feels spacious compared to the single-room lodgings many labourers occupy. His wife, Anne, manages the household with skill. She budgets carefully, buying food from street vendors late in the day when prices drop. She bakes bread rather than buying it. She mends clothes until they cannot be mended anymore. Their children attend a charity school 3 days per week, learning basic literacy and arithmetic. It is more education than James received as a child. Life is hard but stable. The work on Buckingham Palace seems likely to last for years. As long as James stays healthy and employed, the family will survive. But the palace consumes people. In August of 1827, disaster strikes. A section of scaffolding on the west wing collapses without warning. The wooden supports, stressed beyond their design limits by the weight of stone being hoisted up, simply give way. 3 men are on the scaffolding when it falls. They drop 30 feet, crashing onto the cobblestone courtyard below, along with hundreds of pounds of timber and stone. 1 man, a carpenter named William Fletcher, dies instantly. His skull is shattered on impact. His body is carried away within hours, covered with a canvas tarp, taken to a mortuary, and then buried in a pauper's grave. His widow and 3 children receive no compensation. She is left to survive however she can. Within months, she has lost their lodgings and ended up in a workhouse with her children. The second man, a labourer named Robert Shaw, survives the fall, but with catastrophic injuries. Both legs are broken, one so severely that bone protrudes through the skin. His pelvis is fractured. He is carried to a nearby hospital where a surgeon attempts to set the bones. But infection sets in within days. Robert develops a fever, becomes delirious, and dies 2 weeks after the fall, his body unable to fight the gangrene spreading from his shattered leg. The third man, a stonemason named Henry Price, survives but is permanently disabled. His back is broken in the fall. He retains some movement in his upper body but loses the use of his legs. He will never work again. He returns to his family in East London, where he becomes dependent on his wife's earnings as a washerwoman. The injury transforms him from provider to burden, a psychological blow as devastating as the physical one. James Dalton witnesses the accident. He is working on the east wing when he hears the terrible sound of splintering wood, the screams, the crash. He runs across the courtyard and sees the wreckage, broken timber, scattered stone, and 3 men lying motionless on the cobblestones. He helps carry William Fletcher's body to a storage room where it will await collection. He watches as Robert Shaw is lifted onto a cart, screaming in agony, to be transported to the hospital. He sees Henry Price, conscious but silent, staring up at the sky with an expression of pure disbelief. James returns to work the next morning, What else can he do? His family needs the wages. The palace needs completion. The work continues. The accident is not investigated in any meaningful way. Nash inspects the scaffolding briefly, determines that it was overloaded, and orders the construction crews to be more careful. No changes are made to safety procedures. No additional supports are installed. The project simply continues, slightly more cautious for a few days, then returning to the same pressures and shortcuts that caused the collapse in the first place. Parliament begins asking uncomfortable questions about the project. The costs are escalating dramatically. Nash's original estimate of £250,000 has already been exceeded, and the palace is nowhere near completion. Every time Nash submits a new budget request, the total climbs higher. Members of Parliament demand explanations. Why is the palace costing so much? Why does every estimate prove wildly inaccurate? Why does John Nash seem incapable of controlling expenses? Nash deflects brilliantly. He blames unforeseen complications, changes in the king's requirements, the need to use only the finest materials worthy of a royal residence. He is charming, persuasive, skilled at redirecting criticism, but the numbers do not lie. The project is a financial disaster. King George IV does not care. He is dying, though he does not acknowledge it. He is grotesquely obese, barely able to walk, consuming vast quantities of laudanum and brandy to dull the constant pain of gout, dropsy, and probably several other conditions. He visits the palace construction site occasionally, carried in a specially reinforced carriage, and demands more gold, more marble, more grandeur. Each royal visit creates chaos. The king sees something he dislikes and orders it changed. A room is too small. A ceiling needs more decoration. The marble is not the correct shade. Nash scrambles to accommodate these changes, knowing that refusing the king is not an option, even when the changes add thousands of pounds to the budget. George IV dies in June of 1830. He is 67 years old, destroyed by decades of self-indulgence. His last words are reportedly, "This is death." He has never lived in the completed Buckingham Palace. The building he obsessed over, the palace that consumed so much money and so many lives, remains unfinished. His brother, William IV, inherits the throne and the half-built palace. William is 64 years old, a former naval officer with simpler tastes than his flamboyant brother. He looks at Buckingham Palace and sees a monstrous waste of money. He calls it "that damned palace." He offers to turn it into a barracks for the army, or to sell it to Parliament as a replacement for the Houses of Parliament after the old Palace of Westminster burns down in 1834. Parliament refuses both offers. The palace has cost too much to abandon. It must be completed, if only to justify the enormous expenditure. John Nash is dismissed in disgrace. His career is ruined. His reputation as an architect is destroyed by his association with the Buckingham Palace overspend. The press savages him. Political cartoons depict him as a grasping charlatan who enriched himself while bankrupting the nation. Nash retreats to the Isle of Wight, where he owns a castle he designed himself. He dies in 1835, 73 years old, bitter and largely broke despite having designed some of the most important buildings in London. His name will forever be associated with scandal and financial irresponsibility, even though he was merely following his patron's instructions. The work on Buckingham Palace continues under a new architect, Edward Blore, who is given the impossible task of completing the project while reducing costs. Blore is competent but uninspired. He finishes the work with cheaper materials, simpler designs, a general sense of making the best of a bad situation. James Dalton continues working on the palace until 1831. By then his health is noticeably declining. The persistent cough he developed in 1828 has worsened. He coughs constantly, a deep rattling sound that brings up thick phlegm sometimes streaked with blood. His breathing becomes laboured. Tasks that were once easy now leave him gasping. He can work only half days, his endurance destroyed by the progressive lung damage. By 1832, he can no longer work at all. He returns to Kent, to a small cottage his family owns in a village near Maidstone. Anne moves with him, along with their children. She finds work as a laundress. The children, old enough to work, take positions as farm labourers and domestic servants. James sits in the cottage, unable to contribute, watching his family struggle to survive without his income. The cough never stops. His breathing grows worse. He loses weight, his body consuming itself as his lungs fail to provide sufficient oxygen. He dies in March of 1838, 54 years old. The cause of death is recorded as consumption, but it is almost certainly silicosis, caused by breathing stone dust for 13 years. His lungs are destroyed, filled with scar tissue, incapable of performing their basic function. Anne buries him in the village churchyard. There is a small headstone, paid for by pooling money from all 4 children. It reads, "James Dalton, beloved husband and father, died March 1838, aged 54 years. There is no mention of Buckingham Palace, no acknowledgement of his contribution to one of the most famous buildings in the world. He is simply another working man who died too young, his name forgotten, except by his immediate family." Anne survives him by 19 years, working as a laundress until her hands are crippled by arthritis. She dies in 1857, 68 years old, and is buried beside James. Their children scatter across England. One son emigrates to Australia. A daughter marries a shopkeeper in London. The family connection to Buckingham Palace is lost within a generation. None of James's descendants know that their ancestor helped build the facade that defines the British monarchy's public image. The palace opens officially in 1837, when Queen Victoria ascends the throne. It is still incomplete, still lacking many planned features, but functional enough to serve as the royal residence. The stone James Dalton cut and placed remains. It will stand for centuries, beautiful and indifferent, bearing no trace of the man who shaped it or the lungs that were destroyed in the process. Chapter 4. The Young Queen Who Made It Home. The stone stands, indifferent, but the young woman who inherits it will transform cold rooms into the beating heart of an empire. 1837. Princess Alexandrina. Victoria becomes queen at 18 years old on June 20th, the moment her uncle William IV dies in the early morning hours at Windsor Castle. She is awakened at Kensington Palace with the news. She is now Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, ruler of an expanding empire, the most powerful woman in the world. She is also desperate to escape Kensington Palace. Victoria has lived her entire life under the oppressive control of her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and her mother's advisor, Sir John Conroy. The system they imposed on her is known as the Kensington system. Complete isolation from other children, constant supervision, no privacy, no independence. Victoria has never slept alone in a room. She has never had a conversation without someone listening. She has been controlled, monitored, and manipulated for 18 years. Becoming queen offers freedom. 3 weeks after her accession, Victoria moves into Buckingham Palace. The building is still incomplete. Some rooms lack furniture. Others have been finished but never properly furnished. The plumbing is primitive, consisting of water closets that do not work reliably and cesspits that create terrible smells. The kitchens are a quarter-mile from the state dining room, meaning food arrives cold. Victoria does not care. The palace is hers. For the first time in her life, she controls her own household, chooses her own companions, makes her own decisions. She dismisses Sir John Conroy immediately. She limits her mother's access, confining the Duchess to apartments on the opposite side of the palace. She fills her household with people she trusts, primarily Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister, who becomes her closest advisor and something close to a father figure. The palace becomes the center of her life. She holds audiences here, signs state papers here, entertains foreign dignitaries here. She transforms it, from an unfinished construction project into the working headquarters of the British monarchy. But the palace is not an easy place to live or work. The design flaws that plagued it from the beginning remain. Nash prioritized grandeur over function. The result is a building that looks magnificent but operates terribly. The kitchens are located in the basement on the north side of the building. The main state dining room is on the first floor on the south side. Food must travel through a series of corridors, up a staircase, through more corridors, a journey of several hundred yards. By the time meals reach the table, they are lukewarm at best. The heating system barely functions. Coal fires are lit in individual rooms, but there is no central heating. In winter, rooms near exterior walls are freezing. Ladies-in-waiting wear multiple layers of clothing indoors. Ink freezes in inkwells. Water in washing basins develops a skin of ice overnight. The ventilation is inadequate. In summer, the palace becomes stifling. Windows can be opened, but doing so admits the noise and smell of London, horse manure, coal smoke, sewage from the Thames. Many windows remain closed despite the heat, creating stuffy, oppressive conditions, and the staff quarters are miserable. The palace employs hundreds of servants, housemaids, footmen, cooks, grooms, porters, cleaners, laundresses, all the invisible labor necessary to maintain a building of this size and complexity. They live in attic rooms and basement corridors, spaces designed as afterthoughts, given minimal consideration because servants are meant to be invisible. Among the housemaids hired in 1838 is Sarah Jennings, a young woman of 22 from Cornwall. She comes from a farming family, the youngest of 7 children. There is no land for her to inherit, no marriage prospects in her small village, no future except poverty. When a royal household recruiter visits Cornwall looking for staff, Sarah's father sees an opportunity: steady employment, room and board, one less mouth to feed. Sarah travels to London by coach, a journey of 3 days. She arrives in a city vastly larger, dirtier, and more overwhelming than anything she has experienced. She reports to Buckingham Palace, carrying a single cloth bag containing 2 dresses, a nightgown, and a Bible her mother pressed into her hands before she left. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Davies, meets her at a servant's entrance on the side of the building, not the grand entrance that Victoria uses, not the ceremonial gates, but a narrow door leading into a plain corridor. "You will work in the upper floors," Mrs. Davies says, her tone allowing no questions. "Cleaning, maintaining fires, changing linens, whatever is required. You wake at 5. You work until your tasks are complete. You do not speak to the Queen or any member of the royal family unless directly addressed. You do not enter state rooms except to clean them. You do not gossip. Do you understand?" Sarah nods. Mrs. Davies leads her through a maze of servants' corridors, narrow passages that run behind and beneath the grand state rooms. These corridors are plain, undecorated, purely functional. They allow servants to move through the palace without being seen by the royal family or their guests, maintaining the illusion that the building operates effortlessly without visible human labor. They climb a steep, narrow staircase to the attics. The ceiling is so low Sarah must duck in places. The stairs are worn smooth by thousands of feet. At the top, a long corridor stretches into dim distance. Doors line both sides. Mrs. Davies opens one door. The room beyond is tiny. 4 narrow beds, a single small window, bare wooden floorboards, whitewashed walls. 3 of the beds are already occupied by other housemaids' belongings. "This is yours," Mrs. Davies says, indicating the empty bed. "Your wages are £12 per year, paid quarterly. Room and board are provided. You have 1 half-day off per month. Meals are taken in the servants' hall. Do not be late." She leaves. Sarah stands in the cramped room and tries not to cry. This is better than Cornwall, she tells herself. This is opportunity. The work begins the next morning at 5. Sarah is awakened by one of her roommates, a girl named Jenny, who has worked at the palace for 6 months and knows the routines. They dress quickly in the cold, dark room and descend the servants' stairs to the basement for a breakfast of bread and weak tea. Then work. Sarah is assigned to the upper floors, the royal apartments and guest rooms. Her tasks are endless: emptying chamber pots, carrying water for washing, lighting and maintaining fires in every room, making beds with military precision, sweeping floors, dusting furniture, changing linens. The work is physically brutal. She climbs stairs dozens of times per day, carrying buckets of coal, water, dirty linens. Her hands crack from constant immersion in cold water. Her knees ache from scrubbing floors. Her back burns from bending over beds, pulling sheets tight enough to meet Mrs. Davies's exacting standards. She works 16 hours on a typical day. On days when important visitors are expected, she works longer. There are no breaks except for brief meals. There is no sitting down, no rest, no pause. The royal family and their guests are rarely seen. Victoria passes through corridors occasionally, and when she does, servants must press themselves against walls, faces turned away, becoming invisible furniture. The Queen does not acknowledge them. To her, they are part of the palace machinery, necessary but beneath notice. Sarah learns to move like a ghost. Silent footsteps, downcast eyes, work done quickly and invisibly. The perfect servant is one who is never noticed. At night she collapses into her narrow bed, too exhausted to think. The room she shares with 3 other maids is cramped and airless. In summer, the heat is unbearable, the attic rooms directly under the roof absorbing the sun all day. In winter, frost forms on the inside of the small window. The other maids become her only friends. They whisper in the dark, sharing information, warnings, small rebellions. Which footmen expect bribes for not reporting minor infractions? Which cooks will share leftover food? Which rooms have the best fires where a maid can warm her hands briefly while supposedly tending it? Sarah earns £12 per year. From this she tries to send money home to her family in Cornwall. £1 here, a few shillings there, whenever she can spare it. Her father writes back irregularly, brief letters asking for more. Her mother is ill. Her brother needs help. There is always another crisis. Sarah sends what she can and tries not to think about the fact that her wages barely cover her own needs. She owns 2 dresses because she cannot afford a third. She has 1 pair of shoes, worn thin, which she repairs herself because replacing them would cost a month's wages. In 1840, Queen Victoria marries Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. The palace becomes a family home. Within a year, Victoria is pregnant with the first of what will eventually be 9 children. Nurseries are established. The building fills with the sounds of children, crying babies, toddlers running through corridors, young voices echoing in rooms designed for formal ceremonies. The workload for servants increases. More rooms to clean, more fires to maintain, more laundry. Royal children require constant attention, nurses and nursery maids working in shifts. Sarah's duties expand. She now helps maintain the nursery floors, a task requiring even more care because any trace of dirt or disorder will be noticed immediately. Babies and young children are messy. Servants must follow behind them constantly, cleaning, straightening, restoring order. The years pass. Sarah ages rapidly. The work is consuming her. By 1844, she is 28 years old, but looks 40. Her hands are permanently reddened and swollen from cold water and harsh soap. Her back is bent from years of scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. Her face is lined with exhaustion. In September of 1844, Sarah is carrying a heavy bucket of coal up a narrow servant's staircase. The stairs are steep. The bucket is awkward. Her arms are shaking from fatigue. Halfway up, she stumbles. Her foot misses the step. She falls backward, the bucket tumbling with her. She crashes down 10 steps, hitting her head on the wall, the coal scattering everywhere. Other servants hear the fall and come running. They find her unconscious, a gash on her forehead bleeding heavily, coal dust covering everything. She is carried to a small room used for minor medical treatment. A physician is summoned, not one of the royal doctors, but a general practitioner who handles servant injuries. He examines Sarah and determines she has a concussion, but will probably recover. She needs rest, he tells Mrs. Davies. How long? A week at least, possibly longer. Mrs. Davies's expression hardens. We cannot spare her that long. The work must continue. The physician shrugs. He is accustomed to this response. Servants are replaceable. Their health is less important than the smooth operation of the household. Sarah is allowed 2 days of rest, lying in her narrow bed in the attic, dizzy and nauseous from the head injury. On the 3rd day, she is ordered back to work. She tries. She dresses, descends the stairs, begins her duties. But within hours, the dizziness overwhelms her. She collapses again, this time while carrying a tray of tea things. The crash brings Mrs. Davies running. You cannot work like this, Mrs. Davies says, her tone cold rather than concerned. You are no use to us in this condition. Sarah is dismissed. Given her final wages, a few pounds and shillings, and told to leave by the end of the day. She packs her single bag, the same one she arrived with 6 years earlier. She has saved almost nothing. The money she earned was sent to Cornwall, or spent on necessities. She has nowhere to go in London, no friends outside the palace, no family. She uses her last coins to buy a coach ticket back to Cornwall. The journey takes 4 days. She arrives at her family's cottage sick, dizzy, barely able to walk. Her family takes her in, but they have nothing. Her father is aging, unable to work. Her mother died 2 years earlier. The cottage is falling apart, the farm barely productive. Sarah never recovers fully from the head injury. She suffers from chronic headaches, dizzy spells, episodes where she cannot remember where she is or what she is doing. She cannot work, cannot contribute. She dies in April of 1852, 34 years old. The cause of death is recorded as a fever, but the underlying truth is simpler. Her body was destroyed by 6 years of brutal labor at Buckingham Palace, then finished off by a head injury she was not allowed to recover from properly. She is buried in the small churchyard near her family's cottage. The grave is unmarked. Within a generation, no one remembers where exactly she is buried. She becomes one more anonymous death among the rural poor. At Buckingham Palace, another young woman from another poor village takes Sarah's place. The work continues without pause. The palace does not notice she is gone. Victoria knows none of this. She sees servants as part of the building's operation, assumes they are content because they do not complain. She focuses on her growing family, her duties as queen, her relationship with Albert, who is transforming the palace into something more efficient and modern. Albert is systematic, intelligent, deeply interested in improvement. He redesigns the kitchens, bringing them closer to the dining areas. He installs better heating systems. He upgrades the plumbing, adding more water closets and improving drainage. He modernizes the gas lighting, making the palace brighter and safer. But he does not redesign the servants' quarters. That expense is not a priority. Servants are accustomed to hardship. Improving their conditions would set a precedent, suggest that their comfort matters as much as the royal families. So the attic rooms remain cramped and airless. The basement corridors remain damp and dark. The work remains brutal. And servants continue to break, to sicken, to die young, their bodies consumed by labor no one acknowledges. Chapter 5. Empire's Showcase. Labor no one acknowledges, but empire demands it, and the palace becomes the stage where Britain performs its power for the watching world. 1851. The Great Exhibition opens in Hyde Park, less than a mile from Buckingham Palace. It is the first international exhibition, a celebration of industry, innovation, and imperial reach. 6 million people visit over 5 months. The Crystal Palace, a vast temporary structure of iron and glass designed by Joseph Paxton, becomes the symbol of British technological dominance. The exhibition displays goods from across the British Empire and beyond, textiles from India, raw materials from Africa, machinery from British factories, luxury goods from Europe. It is designed to demonstrate that Britain sits at the center of global trade and manufacturing, that the empire is not merely large, but productive, advanced, superior. Victoria and Albert are deeply involved in planning the exhibition. Albert serves as its de facto director, overseeing everything from site selection to the organization of displays. Victoria visits frequently, both during construction and after opening, using the occasion to receive foreign dignitaries and demonstrate British hospitality and culture. Buckingham Palace becomes the headquarters for entertaining these visitors. Kings, emperors, princes, ambassadors, all of them pass through the palace gates, walk through the grand rooms, attend state dinners, and are meant to leave impressed by British wealth, stability, and power. The palace must be perfect. Every surface must gleam. Every piece of silver must be polished. Every room must be free of dust, of imperfections, of anything that might suggest weakness or decline. The servants work around the clock. In the days before a major state visit, the palace transforms into a hive of frantic activity. Housemaids scrub floors on their hands and knees until the marble gleams like glass. Footmen polish hundreds of pieces of silverware, individual forks and spoons inspected for any trace of tarnish. Cooks prepare elaborate multi-course meals, dishes requiring days of preparation, working from recipes designed to impress rather than nourish. Florists bring in thousands of fresh flowers. Every state room must have carefully arranged displays, roses, lilies, orchids, exotic blooms from across the empire. The flowers are replaced daily. Wilted blooms are removed immediately. The impression must be one of effortless abundance. Among the footmen working at the palace is Edward Mills, 26 years old, hired in 1849. He comes from a working-class family in Birmingham, the son of a factory worker. The position at Buckingham Palace seemed like an opportunity to escape the grim future of factory labour. Edward wears the footman's livery, a formal coat with gold braid, knee breeches, white stockings, polished shoes. He stands at attention during formal events, serves meals, carries messages, maintains an expressionless face regardless of what he sees or hears. In April of 1855, Emperor Napoleon III of France makes a state visit to Britain. Relations between Britain and France have improved after centuries of conflict. The Crimean War has made them temporary allies against Russia. The visit is designed to strengthen this alliance and display Anglo-French cooperation to the rest of Europe. The palace staff works 3 consecutive nights preparing for the emperor's arrival. Edward is part of a team polishing silver, moving furniture, arranging rooms, checking and rechecking every detail. He does not sleep. None of them do. They work in shifts, some resting a few hours while others continue, then switching, maintaining a continuous cycle of preparation. By the time Napoleon arrives, Edward has been awake for over 60 hours. His hands shake from exhaustion. His eyes burn. He feels faint but cannot show it. He stands at attention in the entrance hall as the emperor's carriage arrives, his face blank, his posture perfect. The visit lasts 4 days. Edward serves at multiple state dinners, each one featuring over a dozen courses. He carries trays of food, pours wine, removes plates, all while maintaining complete silence and invisibility. Guests are not supposed to notice servants. If they do, the servant has failed. Edward watches the Emperor and the Queen dine on elaborate meals prepared by palace cooks, while he himself has eaten nothing but bread and cold tea in hurried breaks. He listens to aristocrats discuss politics, culture, the glories of empire, while standing so still, his legs cramp and burn. The visit is declared a diplomatic success. Napoleon is impressed. The newspapers praise the palace's elegance and the perfection of British hospitality. Edward collapses the day after the emperor leaves. He sleeps for 14 hours straight, waking disoriented. His body so exhausted it feels like illness. No one thanks him. No one acknowledges the effort. It is simply expected. This is what servants do. This is why they are employed. Over the following decades, the pattern repeats. State visits, royal ceremonies, balls and banquets, each one requiring servants to work impossible hours to maintain the illusion of effortless grandeur. The palace is not just a residence anymore. It is a tool of statecraft, a weapon of soft power. Foreign visitors are meant to see British strength reflected in every gilded surface, every perfectly arranged room, every flawlessly executed dinner. But the strength is an illusion maintained by exhausted, underpaid workers who remain invisible by design. By the 1860s, the British Empire reaches its zenith. A quarter of the world's population lives under British rule. Wealth flows into London from India, Africa, the Caribbean, Australia, New Zealand. The City of London becomes the financial capital of the world. British ships dominate global trade routes. The empire is the largest in human history. Buckingham Palace becomes the symbolic center of this empire. The Queen receives tribute here, grants honors here, reminds the world of Britain's dominance. The building represents more than monarchy. It represents empire itself, the idea that Britain has the right and the power to rule over distant peoples and extract their wealth. Victoria rarely leaves the palace after Albert dies in December of 1861. She enters a prolonged period of mourning, wearing black for the rest of her life, withdrawing from public duties. The palace becomes quieter, more somber, but it never stops functioning as the empire's showcase. State visits continue, diplomatic receptions continue. The machinery of empire requires constant performance, regardless of the Queen's personal grief. The servants who maintain this performance remain invisible and anonymous. Their names do not appear in official histories. Their contributions are not celebrated. They are simply expected to work until they break. In 1870, a scullery maid named Margaret Price begins working in the palace kitchens. She is 16 years old, from a village in Wales, the youngest of 8 children. Her family is desperately poor, subsisting on what they can grow in a small garden and what her father earns as a farm labourer. When a palace recruiter visits Wales looking for kitchen staff, Margaret's parents see an opportunity. One less mouth to feed. Steady wages Margaret can send home. A chance, however small, for something better than rural poverty. Margaret travels to London by train, her first time leaving Wales, her first time seeing anything larger than a village market town. The city terrifies her. The noise, the crowds, the buildings that seem impossibly tall, the smell of coal smoke and horse manure and human waste. She reports to Buckingham Palace and is immediately assigned to the scullery, the lowest position in the kitchen hierarchy. Scullery maids do the dirtiest, hardest work, washing dishes, pots and pans, scrubbing floors, carrying water, emptying slops, cleaning grease and food waste from surfaces. The work is endless. The palace kitchens serve hundreds of meals per day. Every pot must be scrubbed clean. Every pan must be scoured until it shines. Margaret stands at a stone sink for 12 hours a day, sometimes longer, her hands immersed in cold water mixed with harsh lye soap. The water is cold because hot water is expensive, reserved for the royal family's use. Servants wash in cold water, work in cold water, endure conditions that destroy their hands and health. Margaret's hands crack within weeks. The skin splits along her knuckles, between her fingers, across her palms. The cracks bleed. The lye soap burns the raw flesh. She wraps her hands in rags when she sleeps, trying to give them a few hours to heal. But every morning she must unwrap them and plunge them back into cold water and soap. She earns £8 per year, less than housemaids, far less than the cooks she works under. From this tiny sum, she's expected to send money home. Her family needs it. Her younger siblings need food and clothing. The pressure is constant. She lives in a basement room with 5 other scullery maids. The room has no windows. Ventilation comes through a grate in the ceiling that also allows cold air to pour in during winter. The walls are damp. Mold grows in the corners. The room smells of mildew and unwashed bodies. The maids sleep on narrow beds with thin mattresses that offer almost no comfort. They share a single chamber pot. Privacy is non-existent. The youngest girls, like Margaret, get the worst beds, nearest the door where drafts are coldest. Margaret develops a persistent cough within 6 months. The damp, airless room combined with long hours in cold water weakens her immune system. The cough worsens over her second year. It is thick, productive, bringing up phlegm each morning. She continues working because she has no choice. Complaining means dismissal. Dismissal means returning to Wales with nothing, having failed her family. In spring of 1872, Margaret collapses while carrying a bucket of dirty water. She simply faints, her body giving out from exhaustion and illness. The other scullery maids carry her to the basement room and lay her on her bed. A physician is called, not one of the royal doctors, but a general practitioner who handles servant health issues. He examines Margaret briefly, listens to her laboured breathing, and pronounces a diagnosis: weak constitution, unsuited for work. He recommends she be sent home. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, agrees. Margaret is too sick to be useful. She is dismissed that day, given her accumulated wages, less than £2, and told to leave the palace immediately. Margaret uses the money to buy a train ticket to Wales. She travels home alone, feverish and coughing, barely conscious for parts of the journey. She arrives at her family's cottage and collapses into the bed she slept in as a child. The cough never improves. Over the following months, it worsens. She loses weight, her body consuming itself as the disease progresses. The local doctor, when her family can afford to summon him, diagnoses tuberculosis. Margaret dies in February of 1874, 18 years old. Her body is buried in the village churchyard. Her grave is marked with a simple wooden cross that will rot away within a decade. At Buckingham Palace, another young woman from another poor village takes Margaret's place in the scullery. The work continues without pause. The palace does not record Margaret's death. She is not on any official list of staff who died in service. She simply disappears, replaced, forgotten. This is the hidden truth behind the Empire's showcase. For every glittering state dinner, there are people like Margaret destroying their health in basement sculleries. For every foreign dignitary who admires the palace's grandeur, there are invisible hands scrubbing pots in cold water until the skin splits and bleeds. The Empire's strength is built on their suffering, and history will forget almost all of them. Chapter 6. Ghosts or Guilt. History forgets them, but the palace does not, or so the whispers claim, and the line between memory and haunting grows thin in corridors that hold too much pain. 1892. A housemaid named Anne Hathaway, no relation to Shakespeare's wife, begins working at Buckingham Palace. She is 24 years old, from a village in Somerset, hired after the previous maid in her position left to get married. Anne is assigned to clean and maintain a section of the palace that includes several servants' corridors, rarely used during daylight hours. These passages run behind the main staterooms, allowing servants to move through the building without being seen. They are narrow, plainly finished, lit by small windows that admit weak light during the day and remain dark at night except for candles or oil lamps. In October of 1892, Anne is working late one evening, finishing tasks that could not be completed during normal hours. She is carrying fresh linens through one of these corridors, alone, using a candle for light because the oil lamps have not been lit in this section. She turns a corner and stops. A woman stands near the wall ahead, perhaps 20 feet away. She is wearing clothing that seems old-fashioned, a plain dress in a style Anne does not recognize. The woman is standing perfectly still, facing the wall, as if examining it closely or lost in thought. Anne assumes she has encountered another servant, perhaps someone from a different section of the palace. She calls out a greeting. The woman does not respond, does not move. Anne walks closer, intending to ask if the woman needs help. As she approaches within 10 feet, she sees the figure more clearly. The clothing is definitely old-fashioned, decades out of style. The woman's posture is rigid, unnatural. "Miss," Anne says, "are you well?" The figure vanishes, not turning and walking away, not fading gradually, simply gone, as if it were never there. Anne stands frozen, her heart pounding. The candle in her hand shakes, casting wild shadows on the walls. She looks around, searching for any explanation. An open door the woman might have passed through. A side corridor, anything. There is nothing. The corridor is empty. No doors, no alcoves large enough to hide in, no rational way for someone to disappear that quickly and completely. Anne hurries back to the servants' quarters, abandoning the linens. She finds the other housemaids preparing for bed and tells them what happened. The reaction is mixed. Some dismiss it as imagination or the tricks candlelight can play. Others nod knowingly. They have heard similar stories. The palace, they say, has ghosts. Anne insists she was fully awake, alert, certain of what she saw. The figure was solid, real, wearing actual clothing. It was not a shadow or a trick of light. An older maid, a woman named Margaret, who has worked at the palace for 12 years, tells Anne that the corridor she was in passes near the old scullery rooms, areas where the hardest, most brutal work used to happen before kitchen renovations moved operations to a different part of the building. Girls died there, Margaret says quietly, worked themselves to death. Maybe one of them never left. Anne does not sleep well that night. She lies in her narrow bed, listening to the other maids breathe, wondering if what she saw was real, or if her mind created it from exhaustion and the power of suggestion. Over the following months, other servants report similar experiences. A footman claims to hear footsteps in an empty corridor, the sound of someone walking steadily, but no visible person. When he investigates, the footsteps stop. When he retreats, they resume. A cook describes a cold spot in one corner of the kitchen, a specific area where the temperature drops noticeably, even when fires are burning nearby. No draft can explain it. No open window or door, just cold air that stays in one location. A laundress says she saw a shadow move across a wall when no one was there to cast it. The shadow was distinctly human-shaped, walking slowly, then disappearing at the edge of a doorway. The stories accumulate. Some servants refuse to work alone in certain parts of the palace after dark. Others carry religious medallions or small protective charms. A few request transfers to different sections, claiming they feel uncomfortable in their assigned areas. The palace administration dismisses all of it as superstition. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, issues a stern warning. Servants who spread ghost stories will be dismissed. The palace is a respectable institution. Such nonsense will not be tolerated. The stories do not stop. They simply become quieter, whispered in servants' quarters instead of discussed openly. The rational explanations are obvious and compelling. Buckingham Palace is a large, old building. It settles and shifts constantly, creating sounds that can seem like footsteps or voices. Wind moves through gaps in walls and windows, creating drafts and cold spots and sounds that the imagination can interpret as supernatural. Tired. People working long hours in dim light see what they expect to see. Once one person reports a ghost, others become primed to notice similar phenomena. The power of suggestion is strong. Shadows become figures. Drafts become presences. Ordinary sounds become ghostly manifestations. But there is another explanation, less tangible but perhaps more true. The palace holds immense suffering. Workers have died here, killed in construction accidents. Servants have worked themselves to death here, their bodies destroyed by labor that never ended. Margaret Price died at 18 from tuberculosis contracted in damp basement rooms. Sarah Jennings collapsed on a staircase and was dismissed while still injured, dying years later from complications. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of anonymous workers and servants gave their lives to this building, received no acknowledgement, left no trace except the work they completed. That pain does not simply evaporate. It soaks into walls, into floors, into the memory of the place. Whether it manifests as actual ghosts or as psychological impressions experienced by people sensitive to the building's history is almost beside the point. The servants who report seeing ghosts know the palace's true history better than anyone. They work in the same corridors where previous generations suffered. They sleep in the same cramped attic rooms. They understand viscerally that beautiful buildings are often built on invisible suffering. When Anne Hathaway sees a figure in old-fashioned clothing standing near a wall, is she seeing a ghost? Or is she seeing her own understanding of the palace's history made visible by exhaustion, candlelight, and the knowledge that she is walking through spaces where people like her worked until they died? The verdict remains open. Some people believe in ghosts, others do not, but everyone agrees that Buckingham Palace holds more than its official history acknowledges. The ghosts, real or imagined, are a protest. They insist that the palace's story includes more than kings and queens, more than state banquets and diplomatic triumphs. The story includes the invisible people who made it all possible, and if the palace refuses to remember them officially, then perhaps the walls remember instead. Chapter 7. The King Who Didn't Want It. The walls remember, but kings must decide what to do with buildings that hold too much history, and one king will choose love over the crown itself. 1936. King Edward VIII ascends the throne in January after his father, George V, dies at Sandringham. Edward is 41 years old, tall, charming, fashionable, and deeply uncomfortable with royal duty. He has spent his entire life preparing to be king while secretly hoping it would never happen. He finds court protocol suffocating, the endless ceremonies meaningless, the weight of duty unbearable. What he wants is a private life, freedom to pursue his own interests, and most urgently, to marry the woman he loves. Wallis Simpson is an American, twice divorced, sophisticated, sharp-tongued, utterly unsuitable as a queen by the standards of British constitutional monarchy. Edward has been conducting an affair with her for years. His father knew and disapproved violently. The British establishment is horrified. Edward takes one look at Buckingham Palace and sees a prison. The building represents everything he wants to escape: formality, duty, the grinding machinery of monarchy that consumes private lives and demands constant performance. He spends as little time there as possible. He prefers Fort Belvedere, a smaller residence in Windsor Great Park, where he can live more privately, more casually, more like a person than a symbol. But the palace will not release him so easily. As king, he must live there officially, must use it for audiences and ceremonies, must maintain the fiction that Buckingham Palace is the heart of the monarchy. The servants notice immediately that the new king is different. He is less formal than his father, more casual in his interactions, occasionally speaking directly to servants rather than through intermediaries. Some find this refreshing, others find it unsettling, a break with the order and hierarchy that define palace life. Edward's real attention is focused elsewhere. He wants to marry Wallis. She is in the process of divorcing her second husband, Ernest Simpson. Once the divorce is finalized, Edward intends to marry her and make her queen. The constitutional crisis builds slowly through the year. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin warns Edward that Parliament will not accept Wallis as queen. The Church of England, of which Edward is the head, refuses to sanction a marriage between the king and a divorced woman, especially one who divorced her husband while he was still alive. Edward does not care. He loves Wallis. He is willing to sacrifice the throne for her. In December of 1936, the crisis reaches its conclusion. Edward makes his choice. He will abdicate. He will give up the throne, give up Buckingham Palace, give up the duty and ceremony and weight of monarchy. On December the 10th, 1936, he signs the instrument of abdication. On December 11th, he gives a radio address to the nation, explaining his decision in terms that focus entirely on love and personal choice, avoiding the political and constitutional complications. I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love, he says. He leaves England the next day. His younger brother Albert becomes King George VI. Albert has never wanted to be king. He is unprepared, plagued by a severe stammer that makes public speaking torture, terrified of the duty being thrust upon him. George and his wife, Elizabeth, move into Buckingham Palace with their two young daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret. The family tries to create some sense of normalcy, but the palace resists it. The building is too large, too formal, too heavy with expectation. George works desperately to overcome his stammer, undergoing speech therapy with an Australian named Lionel Logue. He knows that a king must speak, must inspire, must project confidence even when feeling none. The palace becomes both his home and his burden. He performs his duties conscientiously, receives ambassadors, signs documents, attends ceremonies. But the weight of it crushes him slowly. And then the war comes. Chapter 8. The Palace Under Fire. Then the war comes, and even palaces cannot hide from bombs, and the building that symbolized permanence discovers it can burn. 1939. War is declared on September 3rd, after Germany invades Poland. Britain and France honor their commitments to Polish independence. The Second World War begins. Initially, the war feels distant. The fighting is in Poland, then in France and the Low Countries. London remains untouched. Buckingham Palace continues operating normally, a strange island of formal ceremony, while the world tears itself apart. But in September of 1940, the Blitz begins. German bombers attack London night after night. The East End is devastated, entire neighbourhoods flattened, thousands killed. The docks burn, factories are destroyed, hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties. Buckingham Palace is hit for the first time on September 13th, 1940. The bomb lands in the palace gardens early in the morning. The explosion is enormous, shaking the entire building, shattering windows, sending staff running for cover. When the dust settles, there is a massive crater where the lawn used to be, but the palace itself is undamaged. The message, however, is clear. The royal family is not safe. Nowhere in London is safe. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, suggests the King and Queen evacuate to Canada, moving the seat of government to safety while Britain fights from its colonies. George refuses absolutely. If the government leaves, if the royal family flees, British morale will collapse. He will stay in London, in Buckingham Palace, sharing the danger with his people. More bombs fall. On September 15th, 1940, a German bomber makes a direct attack on the palace during daylight hours. 2 bombs hit the building. One destroys the palace chapel, a beautiful room designed for royal worship, reducing it to rubble. Another hits the quadrangle, exploding in the central courtyard. King George and Queen Elizabeth are in residence when the bombs hit. They are in a room on the opposite side of the building from the chapel, meeting with officials. They hear the scream of the dive bomber, the whistle of falling bombs, the explosions that shake the entire structure. They survive because they are in a reinforced room. But they feel the impact, hear the destruction, understand how close they came to death. Queen Elizabeth's response becomes famous. "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." She understands the symbolism. The palace has been hit. The royal family has shared the danger. They are not hiding in safety while ordinary Londoners die. This matters immensely for morale. The palace is bombed 9 times in total during the war. Each attack damages the building but never destroys it. The structure proves remarkably resilient, the thick walls and solid construction absorbing bombs that would devastate ordinary buildings. But the palace becomes more than a target. It becomes a refuge. During air raids, hundreds of people shelter in the palace basements. Not just the royal family and senior staff, but ordinary Londoners who happen to be nearby when the sirens sound. Palace guards usher them through side entrances, down into the reinforced basements, into spaces originally designed for storage and servants' quarters. A woman named Dorothy Clark experiences this firsthand in October of 1940. She is 34 years old, works as a clerk in a government office in Whitehall. On the evening of October 15th, she is walking past Buckingham Palace on her way home when the air raid sirens begin their terrible wail. She has perhaps 5 minutes to find shelter before the bombers arrive. The streets empty as people run for the nearest public shelter, underground station, any solid building with a basement. Palace guards see the crowd scattering and make a quick decision. They open a side gate and shout for people to come inside. Dorothy and dozens of others run through, across the courtyard, through a servant's entrance, down narrow stairs into the basements. The space is crowded, dimly lit by electric bulbs, filled with the sound of people breathing, whispering, praying. Dorothy finds a space against a wall and sits down, her back against cold stone, knees pulled up to her chest. The bombing begins. Even deep underground they can hear it, the distant rumble of explosions, the building shaking slightly, dust falling from the ceiling, the terrible uncertainty of not knowing if the next bomb will be the one that collapses the building on top of them. Dorothy sits in the darkness and listens. She thinks about her husband, who is somewhere in North Africa with the 8th Army. She thinks about her children, evacuated to the countryside, safe from the bombs but so far away she sometimes forgets what they look like. She thinks about the absurdity of sheltering in Buckingham Palace, the most famous building in Britain, while German bombs fall outside. The all-clear sounds at dawn. People emerge from the basements, blinking in the light, exhausted, grateful to be alive. The city is covered in smoke and ash. Buildings burn in the distance. The smell of cordite and burning wood hangs heavy in the air. Dorothy walks home through streets, littered with broken glass and rubble. Her flat is intact. She is one of the lucky ones. She never forgets that night. Years later, she tells her grandchildren that Buckingham Palace saved her life. They do not quite believe her. Sheltering in the palace sounds too extraordinary, like something from a story. But it is true. For one night, the building that symbolized distant aristocratic power became a shared refuge, proof that bombs do not respect social hierarchies. The war transforms the palace in other ways. The staterooms are emptied of their most valuable contents. Paintings and furniture moved to locations outside London for safekeeping. What remains is functional but stripped down, the grandeur temporarily suspended. Staff numbers decrease. Many young servants leave to join the military or work in war industries. Those who remain work longer hours, maintaining a building that is both more important and more vulnerable than ever before. The rationing affects everyone, including the royal family. They eat the same limited food as ordinary Britons: bread, potatoes, small portions of meat, everything measured and controlled. The palace kitchens, once capable of producing elaborate multi-course banquets, now prepare simple meals within rationing limits. Some servants find this equalizing. The gap between the royal family's life and their own narrows slightly during the war. They are all cold in winter because coal is rationed. They all eat plain food. They all sleep in fear when the bombers come. But the fundamental hierarchies remain. Servants still live in cramped quarters. They still work long hours for low pay. The war temporarily obscures these inequalities without eliminating them. In April of 1945, the war in Europe nears its end. German forces are collapsing on all fronts. On April the 29th, German officers in Italy sign the Instrument of Surrender for all Axis forces in Italy and Austria. The surrender ceremony takes place at Caserta Palace, ironically in another building built to demonstrate royal power. The final German surrender comes in May. Victory in Europe is declared on May 8, 1945. Massive crowds gather outside Buckingham Palace, chanting for the King and Queen to appear on the balcony. George and Elizabeth step onto the balcony repeatedly that day, waving to the crowds, sharing the relief and joy of survival. The war is not completely over. Fighting continues in the Pacific. But in Europe, it is finished. The palace has survived, damaged but standing, a symbol that endured when so much else was destroyed. But the cost is everywhere. Entire neighborhoods in London are gone, reduced to rubble. Tens of thousands of Londoners are dead. The empire is financially ruined, drowning in debt, dependent on American loans to avoid total collapse. The world that existed before the war is gone, and the palace, standing in the ruins, will have to discover what it represents in this new reality. Chapter 9. The Weight of the Crown. The palace stands in the ruins, and the young woman who inherits it will carry its weight longer than anyone imagined possible. 1952. King George VI dies from lung cancer on February 6th. He is 56 years old. The years of stress, the war, the constant strain of duty, the cigarettes he smoked to calm his nerves, all of it has destroyed him. His daughter, Elizabeth, becomes queen at 25 years old. She is in Kenya when she receives the news, on a royal tour with her husband Philip. She returns to London immediately, stepping off the plane in black mourning clothes, composed and silent. Buckingham Palace becomes the centre of her life. She will live here, work here, eventually die here. The palace is not just a residence, it is the machinery of constitutional monarchy, the place where the symbolic duties of the crown are performed daily. Elizabeth understands this completely. She has been trained for it since childhood, especially after her uncle's abdication made it clear she would one day be queen. She knows that personal preferences, comfort, even happiness are secondary to duty. The coronation takes place on June 2nd, 1953. It is the first coronation televised, broadcast to millions of people across Britain and the Commonwealth. The ceremony is ancient, elaborate, heavy with symbolism and religious significance. Elizabeth is crowned in Westminster Abbey, but the celebrations centre on Buckingham Palace. Crowds gather outside the gates, chanting for the new queen to appear on the balcony. She does, repeatedly, waving to the masses who see her as a symbol of continuity, stability, and hope after years of war and austerity. The palace adapts to the new reign. Elizabeth is more formal than her father, more disciplined, more focused on maintaining proper protocol. She runs her household with precision, demanding high standards from everyone, including herself. The staff numbers are still reduced from pre-war levels. The palace employs hundreds of people, but fewer than in Victoria's time. Modern technology reduces some labor. Electric lights instead of candles, vacuum cleaners instead of hand-brushing carpets, central heating improving on the old coal fire system. But the fundamental nature of service work remains unchanged. People still clean rooms, still carry things, still work long hours maintaining a building too large for efficient operation. In 1963, a housemaid named Patricia Moore is hired. She is 23 years old, from Liverpool, recruited through an advertisement placed by the royal household. The advertisement promises exciting work in a historic setting, the opportunity to serve the crown, and reasonable wages. Patricia applies partly out of curiosity, partly out of necessity. Jobs in Liverpool are scarce, the docks are declining, traditional industries are shrinking. A position at Buckingham Palace, even as a housemaid, seems more secure than anything available locally. She travels to London for an interview. The process is formal, intimidating. She meets with senior household staff who ask about her experience, her family background, her willingness to follow palace rules. She is questioned about her discretion, her politics, her personal life. She is offered the position and accepts. She moves to London with a single suitcase, knowing no one, excited and terrified in equal measure. The reality is harder than she imagined. Patricia lives in the palace, in a room shared with 2 other housemaids. The room is small, but better than the attic spaces servants occupied in previous centuries. There is central heating, adequate lighting, proper beds. The conditions have improved, but not dramatically. She rises at 5:30 every morning. Breakfast is in the servants' hall. Tea, toast, sometimes porridge. Then work. She cleans rooms that the public never sees, staff offices, private apartments, corridors that connect the working parts of the palace. She polishes furniture, changes linens, empties bins, maintains order. The work is repetitive and physically demanding. Her hands chap from cleaning chemicals. Her back aches from bending and lifting. The hours stretch long, especially when important visitors are expected and everything must be perfect. She earns £16 per week, barely enough to live on even with room and board provided. She sends a few pounds home to her mother in Liverpool when she can spare it, but mostly the money goes to necessities: shoes, clothes, occasional entertainment. The palace prohibits fraternization with the royal family. Servants must maintain distance, speak only when spoken to, avoid eye contact. Patricia sees the Queen occasionally, passing through corridors, always at a distance. She never speaks to her. The Queen does not acknowledge her existence. Patricia develops an understanding of her position. She is part of the building's machinery, necessary but invisible, valued for her work, but not for her individuality. It is not cruel, exactly, but it is dehumanizing in a subtle way. She matters only as a function, not as a person. After 3 years, she quits. The work is too hard, the pay too low, the prospects too limited. She returns to Liverpool, finds work in a factory, marries, has children. She tells friends that working at Buckingham Palace was interesting but not worth it. The glamour existed only from the outside. Inside, it was just hard work, with no real future. The palace does not notice her departure. Another young woman takes her place. The system continues without interruption. Elizabeth's reign settles into routines. Audiences, state papers, ceremonies, foreign tours, all the duties of constitutional monarchy performed with disciplined consistency. She is queen during enormous social changes: decolonization, the decline of British power, the transformation of empire into Commonwealth, the rise and fall of governments, the slow evolution of Britain into a modern multicultural society. Through all of it, Buckingham Palace remains constant. The building symbolizes continuity, the idea that beneath surface changes, fundamental structures endure. But by the 1980s and 90s, the palace and the monarchy it represents face new challenges. The media is more intrusive. The public is less deferential. Royal family scandals, particularly the disintegration of Charles and Diana's marriage, dominate headlines. The palace, once protected by respectful distance, is now subject to constant scrutiny. Every detail of royal life is analyzed, criticized, judged. Chapter 10. The Palace and the People. Every detail is judged, and sometimes the people demand that the palace answer for how it represents them or fails to. 1997. Princess Diana dies in a car crash in Paris on August 31st. The news arrives early Sunday morning. The nation is shocked, grief-stricken, disbelieving. Diana, despite her divorce from Prince Charles, remained immensely popular, seen as someone who cared about ordinary people, who broke royal protocols to connect with real emotions and real problems. Her death creates an unprecedented outpouring of public grief. Within hours, people begin gathering at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace leaving flowers, photos, handwritten tributes. The piles of flowers grow rapidly, covering sidewalks, spreading across lawns. But the royal family is at Balmoral in Scotland. They remain there. They do not return to London. They do not make a public statement. They stay silent while the nation mourns. The mood outside Buckingham Palace turns hostile. Thousands of people gather at the gates. They leave flowers, but they also demand that the Queen return to London, that she speak, that she acknowledge the nation's grief. The most visible symbol of the disconnect is the flagpole. Buckingham Palace flies the royal standard when the monarch is in residence. When the monarch is away, no flag flies. This has been protocol for centuries. Diana dies on Sunday. The Queen remains in Scotland. The flagpole stays empty. The public sees this as disrespect. Diana is dead. The nation is grieving. And Buckingham Palace stands silent, its flagpole empty, suggesting the royals do not care. The pressure builds. Newspapers criticize the Queen's silence. Television broadcasts show the growing crowds, the anger, the sense that the monarchy is out of touch, incapable of responding to genuine emotion. The palace is trapped between tradition and public expectation. Royal protocol says the flag cannot fly at half-mast because the royal standard represents the continuity of monarchy. It never dies. Therefore, it never mourns. But the public does not care about protocol. They want visible acknowledgement of Diana's death and the grief it has caused. Finally, on September 5th, the Queen returns to London. She makes a televised address speaking about Diana's contribution and the nation's loss. It is carefully worded, balancing personal reflection with constitutional distance. The next day, the Queen orders a Union flag raised above Buckingham Palace and lowered to half-mast. It is an unprecedented break with protocol, but necessary to calm public anger. Diana's funeral takes place on September 6th. The crowds outside Buckingham Palace and along the funeral route are massive, hundreds of thousands of people, silent, grieving, united in loss. The crisis passes, but something fundamental has shifted. The palace can no longer rely on tradition and distance to maintain its position. Public approval now matters. The monarchy must prove its relevance, must connect with contemporary values, must justify its continued existence. In the years that follow, the palace opens further. More public tours, more transparency about royal finances, more efforts to appear modern, accessible, relatable. But the fundamental tensions remain. How can an institution based on inherited privilege, ancient protocol, and enormous wealth connect with a society that values equality, meritocracy, and accountability? The palace tries. It modernizes. It engages with social media. It supports charities and causes that resonate with public concerns. The younger royals, William and Harry, work to present a more approachable image. But underneath, the structure persists. The palace still requires an army of workers to function. It still consumes public money through the sovereign grant. It still represents a system where birth determines position, where some people are royal and others exist to serve them. A chef named Marcus Williams experiences this firsthand in the 2010s. He is 31 years old, trained at a prestigious culinary school, hired to help modernize royal menus and bring contemporary techniques to palace kitchens. He expects a dream job. He finds a high-pressure, hierarchical environment where tradition matters more than innovation. The palace kitchens operate on military precision. Every meal must be perfect. Timing is everything. Mistakes are not tolerated. Marcus works 12-hour shifts preparing meals for state banquets, receptions, private dinners. The pay is decent, but not exceptional for his skill level. The hours are brutal. He works evenings, weekends, whenever events require food. His personal life suffers. He barely sees his partner. He has no time for friends. The hierarchy is rigid. Senior chefs make decisions. Junior staff execute them. Ideas from below are rarely welcomed. Marcus's training in modern techniques, his creativity, his desire to innovate, all of it is subordinated to how we've always done it. After 2 years, he quits. He opens a small restaurant in Brighton with a friend. The hours are still long, the work still hard, but it is theirs. They control the menu, the atmosphere, the direction. He tells friends that working at Buckingham Palace taught him what he did not want his life to be. The prestige was not worth the cost. The connection to history was not worth the loss of autonomy. The palace does not struggle to replace him. There are always young chefs eager for the prestige of working in the royal household, willing to accept the conditions because the resume credential seems valuable. This is how the system perpetuates itself. It consumes people, uses them, and when they leave, it simply finds replacements. The individuals change, but the structure endures. Chapter 11. The Hidden Price. The structure endures, but the cost of endurance is written in lives the palace has never counted and names it never recorded. 2024. A tour group walks through the staterooms on a Saturday afternoon in July. The guide is professional, knowledgeable, practiced. She explains the history of the throne room, the artwork in the picture gallery, the grandeur of the ballroom. The tourists listen, take photographs, admire the chandeliers and the gilding and the polished marble floors. They see beauty, history, the physical embodiment of monarchy. They do not ask who polishes those floors. They do not ask how many people work overnight shifts preparing the palace for morning events. They do not ask what happened to the workers who built this place, who maintained it across centuries, who gave their bodies and their lives to keep it standing. The tour lasts 90 minutes. The guide covers the official history. When the palace was built, which monarchs lived here, what important events took place in these rooms. She mentions John Nash, the architect who created the grand design. She mentions Queen Victoria, who made it the official royal residence. She mentions the Blitz, when bombs damaged but did not destroy the building. She does not mention Thomas Archer, the carpenter who drove piles into swampland in 1703 and died from pneumonia at 44. She does not mention William Harper, the plasterer whose hands bled from Lyme and who died from silicosis at 48. She does not mention James Dalton, the stonemason who shaped Portland stone and died coughing blood at 54. She does not mention Sarah Jennings, the housemaid who collapsed on a servant's staircase and was dismissed while injured, dying at 34. She does not mention Margaret Price, the scullery maid who contracted tuberculosis in damp basement rooms and died at 18. Their names appear on no plaques. Their contributions are not celebrated. The official history of Buckingham Palace does not include them. This is not an oversight. This is intentional. The palace's history is meant to be about power, grandeur, the continuity of monarchy across generations. Workers and servants are not part of that narrative. They are meant to be invisible in life and forgotten in death. But forgetting them does not erase them. The palace exists because they existed. The beautiful facades, the elegant interiors, the functional systems that allow the building to operate, all of it rests on labor performed by people whose names were never meant to matter. Thomas Archer spent 2 years driving wooden piles into marshland, creating the foundation that still supports parts of the palace today. His body was destroyed by the work. His family struggled after his death, but without him, and hundreds like him, the palace would have sunk into the swamp. William Harper created ornamental plasterwork of extraordinary beauty, ceilings that tourists admire today without knowing who made them. His hands cracked and bled from constant exposure to lime. His lungs filled with plaster dust that eventually killed him. But his work remains perfect and permanent. James Dalton cut and placed Portland stone that forms the palace's facade, the familiar image photographed millions of times every year. He died from silicosis caused by breathing stone dust for 13 years. But the stone stands, indifferent to his suffering. Sarah Jennings scrubbed marble floors until they gleamed, maintained fires in royal apartments, worked 16-hour days for £12 per year. She fell down a servant's staircase from exhaustion and was dismissed instead of cared for. She died at 34, her body used up and discarded. Margaret Price stood at a sink in the palace scullery for 12 hours a day, her hands immersed in cold water and harsh soap until the skin split and bled. She slept in a windowless basement room with 5 other maids. She contracted tuberculosis from the damp, airless conditions and died at 18. Another young woman took her place the next day. These are not exceptions. These are the normal consequences of how the palace has always operated. Beautiful buildings are built on invisible suffering. Grand monuments to power are also monuments to the people whose lives were consumed creating them. The only question is whether we choose to see this. Most visitors to Buckingham Palace do not. They see the gold leaf, the chandeliers, the perfect symmetry. They photograph the changing of the guard. They admire the staterooms. They leave thinking they have experienced British history, British tradition, the continuity of monarchy. They have experienced only the surface. The real history, the true cost, remains hidden behind velvet ropes and official narratives that exclude the uncomfortable truths. Chapter 12. The Protest in the Walls. The uncomfortable truths remain, but sometimes the walls themselves speak, refusing to let the forgotten stay silent forever. 2015. Restoration work begins on a section of the palace closed to the public for decades. The section includes servants' corridors and storage rooms dating back to the original Buckingham House, areas that have been modified over centuries but retain elements of the earliest construction. Workers are removing old plaster from the walls, preparing to install updated electrical systems and climate control. As they chip away layers of plaster and paint accumulated over 250 years, they find something unexpected: scratches in the plaster, marks carved deliberately before the plaster hardened, initials, dates, names, T.A. 1704, W.H. 1763, S.J. 1841. The workers photograph the marks and report them to the palace archivist, a historian responsible for documenting and preserving the building's history. The archivist, a woman named Helen Carter, examines the photographs carefully. She recognizes immediately what these are: marks left by workers and servants, small acts of rebellion, quiet protests against being erased. People who knew their names would never appear in official records, who understood they were meant to be invisible, but who refused to disappear completely. Helen begins researching. She searches through parish records, census data, wage ledgers, anything that might connect initials to actual people. T.A. could be Thomas Archer, the carpenter who worked on Buckingham House in 1703 and 1704. Parish records show a Thomas Archer, carpenter, buried in 1719. The dates match. W.H. could be William Harper, the plasterer who worked on renovations in the 1760s. Records show a William Harper, plasterer, who died in 1778. The dates match. S.J. could be Sarah Jennings, a housemaid who worked in the palace in the 1800s and 40s. No clear records exist, but the timing is consistent. Helen writes a report documenting her findings. She recommends preserving the marks, photographing them, including them in the palace's official archive. She argues that these marks are part of the building's history, evidence of the thousands of workers and servants whose labor made the palace possible. The palace administration reviews her report. They thank her for the research. They file it away. They do not include the marks in public tours. They do not create any interpretation or signage explaining what the marks mean. The restoration continues. The walls are replastered. The marks are sealed behind fresh paint and plaster. Helen is disappointed, but not surprised. The palace has never been interested in telling the stories of workers and servants. Those stories complicate the official narrative, raise uncomfortable questions about who benefits from beauty built on suffering. But she makes copies of all her research. She publishes an article in an academic journal, a small circulation periodical read mostly by historians. The article is titled, "Carved Initials, Evidence of Worker Protest at Buckingham Palace." The article receives little attention. A few historians cite it. The palace does not comment. Most people never hear about it. But the marks still exist, hidden behind plaster. The protest continues, silent, waiting for someone else to find it. This is not the only protest hidden in the palace. Throughout the building, in closed sections and forgotten corners, there are traces of the people who built it and maintained it. Scratches in plaster, graffiti in hidden spaces, objects left behind in walls during construction, small personal items that workers placed deliberately, knowing they would be sealed in and forgotten, but wanting some physical proof they existed. In the 1990s, during renovation work on a different section, workers found a clay pipe sealed in a wall cavity. The pipe dated to the early 1800s. Someone placed it there intentionally, perhaps as a kind of time capsule, perhaps as a small rebellion, a way of saying, "I was here," to a future that would otherwise forget them completely. These hidden protests share a common theme. Refusal. Refusal to be erased. Refusal to accept that the palace's story belongs only to the people at the top. Refusal to let beauty stand as the only truth when underneath is suffering that deserves acknowledgement. The palace has always depended on this erasure. Its power comes partly from appearing effortless, timeless, above the messy realities of labor and exploitation. If visitors saw the true cost, if they understood how many bodies were broken and discarded in service to grandeur, the building might lose some of its magic. So the marks stay hidden, the names stay forgotten. The official history continues unchanged, celebrating monarchs and architects while ignoring the thousands of people whose invisible labor made everything possible. But refusal persists. The marks in plaster wait. The pipes in wall cavities wait. The truth waits, patient, knowing that eventually someone will care enough to look. Chapter 13. The Question the Palace Cannot Answer. The truth waits, patient, and it poses a question the palace has never been able to answer honestly. Who is this place really for? 2024. Buckingham Palace costs British taxpayers approximately £40 million per year to maintain through the sovereign grant, a funding mechanism that replaced the old civil list in 2012. The sovereign grant is calculated as a percentage of Crown Estate profits, currently 15%, increased temporarily to 25% to fund a major 10-year renovation project. Supporters of the monarchy argue that this is a bargain. The Crown Estate generates far more revenue than the monarchy costs. Tourism related to royal properties brings in hundreds of millions of pounds. The monarchy provides stability, continuity, a living connection to British history and culture. The value cannot be measured only in pounds and pence. Critics argue that the palace and the monarchy it represents are indefensible in a modern democracy. Inherited privilege, Massive wealth concentrated in one family, public money spent maintaining buildings and lifestyles for people whose only qualification is birth. They point to other European monarchies that manage with far less grandeur, or to countries that abolished monarchy entirely and function perfectly well as republics. The debate is genuinely unresolvable because it depends entirely on what you believe the palace represents. If it represents tradition, continuity, a stable constitutional structure that has evolved over centuries, then the cost is justified. Monarchy is not just about individuals. It is about a system, a set of relationships between crown, parliament and people that has adapted successfully to enormous social changes. The palace is the physical embodiment of this system. If it represents inequality, outdated hierarchy, the persistence of aristocratic privilege in an age that claims to value meritocracy, then no amount of tourism revenue justifies it. The palace becomes a monument to everything wrong with concentrating wealth and power in a tiny elite, while ordinary people struggle. Both views are true simultaneously. The palace is both symbol and burden, both beautiful and unjust, both a magnet for tourism and a reminder of empire built on exploitation. History does not resolve these contradictions. It simply records them, allowing each generation to argue about what the palace means and whether it should continue to exist. But one question rarely gets asked in these debates. What does the palace cost the people who work there? Not the royal family, not the senior household staff who earn good salaries and enjoy prestigious positions. The ordinary workers, the housekeepers, the maintenance staff, the cleaners, the kitchen workers, everyone who keeps the building functioning day by day. They work long hours for modest pay. They maintain a building too large for efficient operation. They serve a family whose wealth is unimaginable compared to their own. They do this because they need employment, because the prestige of working for the royal household means something on a resume, because the alternatives might be worse. But they are still people whose labor is consumed to maintain a symbol most of them will never personally benefit from. This is the question the palace cannot answer honestly. Why should ordinary people sacrifice their time, their health, their bodies to maintain grandeur that belongs to someone else? The palace offers various answers: tradition, national identity, economic benefits, the importance of preserving history. All of these are true to some extent, but none of them address the fundamental inequality of the relationship. The workers who built Buckingham Palace did not benefit from its grandeur. Thomas Archer drove piles into swampland and died from pneumonia, never seeing the finished building. William Harper created beautiful plasterwork and died from silicosis, his family left in poverty. James Dalton shaped Portland stone and died coughing blood, buried in an unmarked grave. The servants who maintained it across centuries lived in cramped quarters, worked punishing hours, died young from diseases caused by the conditions they worked in. Sarah Jennings collapsed on a staircase and was discarded. Margaret Price contracted tuberculosis and died at 18. Patricia Moore quit after 3 years because the work destroyed her health for inadequate pay. The modern workers are treated better, certainly. Working conditions have improved dramatically, but the fundamental structure persists. Some people live in palaces, others clean them. Some inherit vast wealth, others work for wages barely adequate to survive. The palace cannot justify this honestly because there is no honest justification. The system exists because it has always existed, because change is difficult, because powerful interests benefit from maintaining it. Chapter 14. The People. The Palace Erased. The system exists because powerful interests benefit, but the people it erased deserve more than silence, and someone must speak their names even if official history will not. 2024. Helen Carter, the palace archivist who found the carved initials, continues her research in her spare time. She is 38 years old now, employed by the Royal Collection Trust, responsible for cataloguing and preserving the historical records related to royal properties. Her official work focuses on documenting royal events, preserving correspondence and photographs, maintaining the official archive. But her personal project, the one she pursues on weekends and evenings, is different. She is trying to recover the names of people who worked at Buckingham Palace across its history. Workers, servants, anyone whose labor contributed to building or maintaining the palace but who left no trace in official records. The work is difficult. Most records focus on the royal family, nobles, senior household staff. Ordinary workers and servants were not considered worth documenting. When they appear in records at all, it is usually as categories rather than individuals. Housemaid, £12 per annum, or labourer, 6 shillings per week. Helen searches through sources the official histories ignore. Parish records from churches near the palace, documenting baptisms, marriages, burials. Census records, which began in 1801 and list every person living at a given address. Death certificates, which sometimes provide occupations and addresses. Court records, workhouse records, hospital records, anywhere working-class people might appear briefly before disappearing again into anonymity. She pieces together fragments. A name here, a death date there. Occasionally a brief mention in a diary or letter written by someone wealthier who noticed a servant's existence for a moment before forgetting them again. She finds Thomas Archer in the parish records of St. Mary's Church, Rotherhithe. Buried February 17th, 1719, aged 44 years, carpenter. Cause of death, fever. His widow, Catherine, buried in the same churchyard, 1750, aged 68. She finds William Harper in the records of St. James's Church, Clerkenwell. Buried July 9th, 1778, aged 48 years, plasterer. Survived by widow Mary Harper and 2 daughters. She finds James Dalton in the records of Maidstone Parish Church, Kent. Buried March 21st, 1838, aged 54 years, stonemason. Survived by widow Anne Dalton and 4 children. She cannot find Sarah Jennings definitively, but she finds several housemaids with the initials S.J., working at the palace between 1838 and 1845. One died in Cornwall in 1852, aged 34, cause of death recorded as consumption. The timing matches. Helen makes a note. Possibly Sarah Jennings requires further research. She finds Margaret Price in Welsh parish records. Born March 1854 in Glamorgan. Died February 1874, aged 18 years. Cause of death, tuberculosis. Parents listed as John Price, labourer, and Catherine Price. For each person she identifies, Helen creates a brief biography. Everything she can discover: birth, family, when they came to the palace, what work they did, when and how they died. Some biographies are only a few lines. A few are more substantial when more sources exist. She compiles these into a document she calls The Hidden Workforce, Lives of Workers and Servants at Buckingham Palace, 1703 to present. It is not comprehensive. She knows she has identified only a tiny fraction of the thousands of people who worked at the palace across 3 centuries. But it is something. It is proof that these people existed, that their lives had value, that they deserve to be remembered. She submits the document to her supervisors at the Royal Collection Trust, suggesting it could form the basis for an exhibition or publication. They read it politely. They compliment her research. They file it away. They explain that this is not the kind of history the palace wants to emphasize. Helen expected this response, but it still stings. The people she researched built the palace, maintained it, gave their lives to it. Their stories are as much a part of the building's history as the monarchs who lived there. But the official narrative has no room for them. She makes copies of all her research. She publishes articles in academic journals where she can. She gives talks at history conferences to small audiences of specialists. She ensures the research exists, is preserved, is available to anyone who cares to look. She knows most people will not look. The palace's official story is more appealing. Grandeur, tradition, continuity, beauty. Adding stories of workers who died young from preventable diseases complicates that narrative, makes visitors uncomfortable, raises questions about whether beauty built on suffering should be celebrated. But Helen continues anyway. She does it because someone has to. She does it because Thomas Archer and William Harper and James Dalton and Sarah Jennings and Margaret Price and thousands of others deserve to have their names spoken, their lives acknowledged, their sacrifices recognized. She thinks about the carved initials hidden behind plaster. Those marks were acts of protest, refusals to be erased. Her research is a continuation of that protest. She cannot restore the lives that were taken. She cannot undo the suffering. But she can insist that it happened, that it mattered, that forgetting it is not acceptable. The palace will not help her. It will continue telling the story it prefers, the one that celebrates power without acknowledging cost. But Helen's research exists now. It is part of the record. Future historians will find it. Future people will read it. And perhaps, eventually, the official story will have to make room for the truth. Chapter 15. The Reflection in the Stone. The truth exists now, and the stone reflects back, not just grandeur, but everything we refuse to see in ourselves. 2024. Late afternoon in July. The tour groups have finished. The palace is closing to visitors. The staterooms fall quiet. A security guard named David Walsh walks through the rooms on his final check of the evening. He is 56 years old, has worked at the palace for 12 years. He has seen these rooms thousands of times. He no longer notices the gold leaf or the chandeliers, the priceless paintings or the ornate furniture. But today, for reasons he cannot quite explain, he stops in the throne room. The light is different. Low sun comes through the tall windows at an angle that happens only a few times per year. The light catches the gilding on the thrones, reflects off the polished marble floor, illuminates the painted ceiling in a way that makes the entire room glow. For a moment, the room looks unreal, too perfect, too heavy with meaning. David stands still, looking around. He has been in this room hundreds of times, but he has never really seen it. He has been too busy watching for security threats, checking that everything is in order, performing his duties without pausing to consider what the room represents. Now he thinks about the people who built this room, the stonemasons who shaped the marble, the plasterers who created the ornate ceiling, the carpenters who fitted the wooden frames, the painters who gilded every surface. He thinks about the servants who maintained it across centuries, the housemaids who scrubbed the floor on their hands and knees, the footmen who stood at attention during ceremonies until their legs went numb, the invisible workers whose labor made it possible for the room to exist and to continue existing. He thinks about himself. 12 years walking these halls every night, keeping watch over beauty he could never afford to visit on his days off. He thinks about his daughter Emma, who lives in a cramped flat in East London. She works 2 jobs, one as a teaching assistant, one stacking shelves at a supermarket. She works 60 hours per week and still struggles to pay rent. She has a university degree but cannot find full-time work in her field. She is 32 years old and cannot afford to move out of a flat share. David earns decent money as a security guard, enough to support himself and help Emma occasionally. But the contrast between his life and the palace he guards is stark. The Queen lives upstairs in apartments containing dozens of rooms. Emma shares a 2-bedroom flat with 3 other people. The Queen has never worried about rent, never counted coins to see if there is enough for groceries, never wondered if getting sick means losing income and falling behind on bills. David does not resent the Queen personally. He understands she was born into this, did not choose it any more than he chose to be born into a family that has worked service jobs for generations. His father was a janitor. His grandfather was a factory worker. He has gone slightly higher, reached a position with decent pay and some security, but the fundamental structure of his life is unchanged. Some people are born into palaces, others are born to serve them. The system sorts people before they are old enough to understand what is happening. David does not know if this is fair. He suspects it is not, but he also does not know what could or should replace it. The palace employs hundreds of people. If it closed tomorrow, they would lose their jobs. The tourism it generates supports thousands more. The system is unjust, but it is also the reality people have built their lives around. He finishes his check and leaves the throne room. The doors lock automatically behind him. He walks through corridors now empty and dim, heading toward the security office where he will file his report and end his shift. Outside, London is still bright. The sun has not set yet. People are leaving work, heading home, filling buses and underground trains. The city moves on, indifferent to the palace and its contradictions. Buckingham Palace stands pale and solid in the evening light. 775 rooms hidden behind Portland stone that has weathered 220 years of London air. The building is beautiful. No one can deny that. The architecture is impressive. The history is real. But underneath the beauty is a foundation built on invisible lives. Thomas Archer, who drove piles into swampland and died from pneumonia at 44. William Harper, who created plasterwork and died from silicosis at 48. James Dalton, who shaped stone and died coughing blood at 54. Sarah Jennings, who scrubbed floors and collapsed from exhaustion at 28, dismissed and forgotten. Margaret Price, who washed dishes in cold water and died from tuberculosis at 18. Patricia Moore, who cleaned rooms for 3 years and quit because the work destroyed her for inadequate pay. Marcus Williams, who cooked elaborate meals and left because the hierarchy crushed his creativity. Thousands more whose names are lost. Carpenters, masons, servants, cooks, cleaners, guards. People whose labor was poured into stone and then erased from the story. The palace does not acknowledge them. The official history celebrates monarchs and architects, state visits and ceremonies. The workers are written out, made invisible by design. But they were there. They built every wall. They polished every floor. They maintained every system. Without them, the palace would be nothing but an empty dream, beautiful on paper, but impossible in reality. This is the truth the palace cannot escape. Beauty has a cost. Grandeur requires sacrifice, and someone always pays the price. The guard at the gate stands perfectly still. Rain has started to fall, light drops that darken the red wool of his tunic. Behind him, Buckingham Palace waits, patient and heavy. The building will outlast all of us. It will stand long after everyone alive today is dead and forgotten. Future generations will visit, take photographs, admire the architecture. And the question will remain, unchanged and unanswered. Who paid the real price for this?